suffocatingly vast living room of the mansion idly spinning the crystal glass Mother had just filled with apple juice. A faint trace of mint hung in the air, but I could not manage even one sip. The room was exactly the same as when I was a child, veinted ceilings and Austrian crystal chandelier that glittered like ice. Cream-colored Italian leather sofas that no one dared sink into too hard for fear of creasing them. Everything was flawless. Everything was exorbitantly expensive. Everything felt foreign to me. My name is Trevor Dalton, a photographer who lives in a tiny studio apartment in Fairview. The place I was sitting in right now was not my home. This was my parents' house, or more accurately, my father's palace. Billionaire Richard Dalton, the tycoon behind Dalton Retail Group, a man who could buy an entire city block on a whim. And to him I was nothing more than the useless son who liked to wander around taking meaningless photographs. Mother sat beside me, her hand resting gently on my knee the way she always did, just before Father walked in. Her name is Linda. She is 58, gentle and kind with warm brown eyes. She is still beautiful, her long black hair tied low. She has a soft smile that has always made me feel at peace whenever I am near her. "Are you well, Trevor?" "It has been so long since you came home," she said softly. I nodded and forced a smile. "I am fine, Mom. Work is fine." She knew I was lying. She always knows simply because she is my mother, the woman who watched me grow up. Then the study door swung open. The measured click of leather shoes echoed across the imported oak floor. My father entered without looking at me first. He glanced only at the Rolex on his wrist, then lowered himself into the armchair opposite me. He is 64, hair cropped short and silver-white square jaw, eyes sharp as blades. He wore a charcoal suit and a tightly knotted tie, even though he was at home. "I do not have much time." "What do you want?" he asked directly. "No greeting? No how are you?" His low, cold voice was so familiar it made my heart contract. I drew a deep breath. I had rehearsed this sentence for a solid week in front of the mirror in the car, even while washing dishes. But now, sitting here in front of him, the words jammed in my throat. "I would like to borrow Grandpa's Bentley just for a few days. Emily and I are planning to drive up to the mountains to shoot autumn foliage." Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. 10 seconds. Father raised an eyebrow. The corner of his mouth curved into that familiar, contemptuous arc. "You want to borrow the 1956 Bentley?" He repeated slowly, as though chewing each syllable. "To take some little writer girl joyriding, Emily, sir," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. He gave a dry, humorless laugh that cracked like breaking glass. "The wandering photographer wants to drive a classic car worth a fortune. That is rich." My heart pounded against my ribs. Heat rose to my face, but I was not allowed to lose my temper. "Never in front of him. I will drive carefully," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I know its value. I just want to experience it once. Besides, you never drive it yourself. It just sits there." Father stared at me, his gaze drilling straight through. "Exactly. Because I do not touch it. It is still in perfect condition," he growled. "And you ride around on that beat-up motorcycle taking pictures no one buys. If I hand the car over to you and you wrap it around a tree, then what, Richard?" "Calm down," Mother said gently but firmly. "That car belonged to your father. He left it to the whole family. Trevor is his grandson too. He is only asking to borrow it for a few days." Father whipped his head toward her. I saw his jaw clench, but Mother did not back down. She rarely opposed him, but whenever she spoke up for me, he relented. "Just a little. That car is a keepsake," he said, voice lower but still cutting. "A memento of someone who is gone. Not a toy for my dear son to show off to his girlfriend." I swallowed hard. I am not showing off. Dad, I managed. I just want to feel close to Grandpa again. He has been gone 6 years, and I thought maybe the things he loved, could bring a little of his warmth back. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and for one fleeting instant I saw it. Something flashed in my father's eyes, not anger, panic. Then it vanished, instantly replaced by his usual disdain. He was silent for so long I could hear the wall clock ticking. Finally he stood, walked to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a whiskey. He did not offer me any. He never has. 4 days, he said without turning around. Only 4 days. Do not exceed 45 miles an hour. No smoking inside. No food or drink. And if that girl so much as leaves a smudge on the leather, he turned back. His stare was so cold my spine went icy. You will pay a price far higher than the car itself. Trevor. I nodded frantically, heart racing so hard it felt ready to burst from my chest. Yes, sir. I promise I will take perfect care of it. Mother smiled, eyes shining. She squeezed my hand as if to say, You did it. Father pulled an old key from his suit pocket, worn leather fob, heavy brass bow. He set it on the table beside the cabinet. Do not disappoint me again, he said, then turned and walked straight upstairs without another word. I picked up the key. It was cold and heavier than I expected. The faint scent of aged leather and old gasoline rose from it, carrying memories from decades past. I remembered sitting on Grandpa's lap while he drove that Bentley, his warm hands over mine on the wheel. One day you will drive this car, Trevor, he had said, when you are grown, and you know how to cherish it. I never imagined that day would arrive like this 6 years after he was gone, with my father looking at me like I was the enemy, and with the chilling certainty that this car was more than just a car. It was guarding some secret my father did not want anyone to touch. Mother kissed my forehead before I left. Be careful, sweetheart, she whispered. And do not let your father make you sad. I nodded, but I already knew sadness was an old companion. What I felt now was not sadness. It was a deep, powerful unease. I stepped out of the mansion's living room and headed toward the garage, the key lying ice-cold in my palm. The vast garage yawned open before me, stark white LED lights pouring down and turning the 1956 Bentley into a gleaming black jewel amid the darkness. Beside it stretched a long row of million-dollar supercars. Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes lined up impeccably like a collection that flaunted the Dalton family's power and wealth. I stood there for a long moment, eyes fixed solely on the Bentley, not daring to touch it yet. Its beauty was too perfect, too classic. The graceful curves, the chrome radiator grills sparkling like stars, the endlessly long body a work of art from a bygone era. This was more than a car. It was a fragment of memory about my grandfather, the only man in the family who had ever made me feel truly loved. I opened the driver's door and slid inside. The scent of aged leather, polished wood, and a faint trace of gasoline from decades past rushed into my nostrils, enveloping me like a warm embrace from the past. I inserted the key, turned it gently, and the engine roared to life with a deep, resonant growl, powerful like an old beast awakening after 6 long years of slumber in the garage. For the first time that day, I smiled a genuine smile from the bottom of my heart. My mood lifted as if a heavy burden had been shed. At last I was free from the stifling atmosphere of the mansion, from my father's icy glare, and the bitter words he reserved for me. Now it was just me, Grandpa's car, the open road ahead, and Emily waiting at our rendezvous. I drove out through the mansion gates, the wheels gliding smoothly over the white gravel. The crimson sunset in the western sky painted the windshield red, casting an ethereal glow over everything. I switched on the vintage radio and caught a soft jazz tune from the 1950s, the kind Grandpa must have listened to. The mellow melody made me smile to myself. I accelerated a little, feeling the engine's power transmit through the walnut steering wheel. Wind whistled through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding gardens. Everything felt perfect, and I imagined the upcoming trip with Emily would be the most beautiful time. We would head to the mountains. I would take photos, she would write, and we would laugh together like two kids escaping the pressure-filled adult world. Our meeting spot was a small cafe by Lake Oswego, where we had first met over a year ago. I parked right in front, the headlights sweeping across the lake's shimmering surface under the fading evening light. Emily was already there, wearing an adorable oversized camel sweater, her long brown hair cascading over her shoulders. She was a profound and refined writer, always carrying a notebook to jot down sudden ideas. When she saw me, her eyes lit up, and a radiant smile bloomed on her lips. The smile that made me forget all my weariness every time I saw it. "Oh my God. Trevor, are you serious?" She ran over and threw her arms around me the moment I stepped out of the car, her vanilla sandalwood perfume making me want to kiss her right then and there. "I thought you were joking. This is a real Bentley." I laughed heartily and planted a loud kiss on her hair. "It is real, babe." Dad reluctantly lent it to me, but do not ask for details. It is a long story, and none of it is pleasant. Emily let go of me, but her eyes immediately locked onto the car. Then she froze as if turned to ice. It lasted only a few seconds, but I noticed the shift instantly. Her gaze was not ordinary admiration. It was an indescribable shock, as if some invisible force surrounded the car and pulled her into another world. Her lips parted. Her body leaned forward slightly, eyes unblinking, the wind rustling leaves around her while she remained motionless. "Emily, what is wrong?" I called softly, touching her shoulder in concern. She blinked rapidly, startled, and her smile returned at once as if nothing had happened. "Nothing. I am fine. It is just so beautiful. I have never seen a classic car this stunning outside of movies." She stepped closer, gently running her hand over the hood as if stroking a rare animal, her eyes sparkling with delight. "Look at these curves. It is a genuine work of art. Are you sure your dad really lent it to you and you did not steal it?" I burst into easy laughter, feeling truly relieved for the first time that day. "It is legit, but only for 4 days and no scratches allowed." Emily spun toward me, eyes shining like a child who had just seen a long-dreamed-of toy. "Can I drive it?" "Just a short stretch, please. I really want to feel it." I looked at her, then at the car, then back at her. Emily was not the type to obsess over cars. She preferred books and could sit for hours by a window writing rather than caring about engines or speed. But right now she was utterly captivated, and I could not bring myself to refuse. "All right, but be careful. It is old." I opened the driver's door for her in that chivalrous, old-fashioned way she always teased me about, and Emily slipped in gently as if afraid of hurting the car. Her hands rested on the wheel, eyes closing briefly to savor the classic luxury. Oh my God, 100% real leather walnut steering wheel. I feel like I am in Casablanca. I leaned against the doorframe outside, smiling as I watched her, thinking how beautiful she was. At 27, she could still be as innocently youthful as an 18-year-old, especially when excited like this. But then everything happened so fast I could not react. The instant Emily's hands tightened slightly on the wheel, her whole body jerked as if hit by a powerful electric shock. Her face went ashen, eyes wide with panic, staring straight ahead at the space in front of the wheel. Her breathing became ragged, chest heaving violently, pupils dilated, lips trembling without forming words. "Emily." I lunged forward in terror, reaching to pull her out, but she yanked her hands off the wheel before I could touch her, a choked scream of horror escaping her throat. Her body shook uncontrollably like a malaria fever. She tried to push the door open but had no strength, slumping against the seat, as if about to collapse. I flung the door wide and pulled her out immediately, wrapping my arms tightly around her shoulders as she nearly fell into me. Cold sweat poured down her forehead, soaking her hair and sticking it to her cheeks. "Emily, what is happening? Talk to me." She could not answer right away, just trembling in my arms, and I felt every spasm ripple through her. My heart pounded with fear. I had no idea what the hell had just happened. It took a long while after I'd helped her sit on the curb for her to regain composure. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. Did you see anything?" Her voice broke, still shaking. There was someone in the car." "Who?" "There is no one," I said, trying to sound calming even though I was rattled. She shook her head frantically, clutching my shirt as if letting go would send her plummeting. Not a real person, but an old man. He appeared right in front of the wheel, face purple eyes, milky white mouth, moving, begging me for help. He said he was murdered. He said it was not an accident. A chill ran through my entire body as she continued, voice faltering between shudders. He was wearing a dark blue shirt, silk tie, silver hair combed back, a small mole on his left cheek, deep-set eyes, high nose. He looked at me, pleading, then said, "I was murdered. Not an accident. Tell my grandson." Every detail she described matched my grandfather, Walter Dalton, perfectly. The dark blue shirt he wore most often. The mole on his left cheek I remembered clearly from childhood when I sat on his lap. The distinctive way he combed his hair back. I had never shown Emily a photo of him. I had only mentioned his name in passing once. "Emily, what are you saying?" My voice came out hoarse, throat tight. "How could you know those details?" She stared at me, eyes still wild with terror. "He said he was your grandfather, Walter Dalton. He was really murdered, not lost at sea like everyone thinks." I collapsed onto the curb beside her, my mind reeling as if I had been punched. 6 years ago, Grandpa went fishing alone and vanished. They found only the boat adrift, no body. Dad said the waves took him and the family held a funeral without a coffin. Now someone who had never met him, never seen a picture, was describing him down to the last detail. We sat there for a long time. I held her to keep her warm and told her about Grandpa to confirm every detail. And she nodded frantically, her face growing even paler because she did not understand it either. "I am sorry. I did not mean to ruin our trip." "It is okay," I said, even though my heart was racing with fear and doubt. "We are still going right. I still want to go with you." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded weakly, though her eyes remained haunted. "Let us go. I do not want you to be sad because of me." We got back in the car. This time I drove Emily in the passenger seat, gripping the seatbelt tightly, occasionally glancing at the wheel as if something might reappear. I tried to lighten the mood with cheerful talk about the scenic road ahead. The autumn pine forests, the photos I would take of her, but both of us knew the trip had changed completely. It was no longer the carefree adventure we had planned. As I accelerated onto the highway, the evening chill whistling through the windows, I could not help glancing in the rear-view mirror at the gleaming car behind us. It still looked stunning under the streetlights, but now every thought of the steering wheel sent a shiver down my spine. Was Grandpa really trying to say something through Emily? Or was it all imagination? Deep down I could feel something terrible looming, and I was afraid to face it. The trip we had dreamed about for so long turned into a heavy obsession right from the very first miles. I drove along the winding mountain road, trying to focus on the towering pine canopies on both sides and the endless expanse of fiery autumn leaves. But the atmosphere inside the car remained strangely stifling. Emily sat in the passenger seat, gripping the seat belt so tightly that her knuckles turned white, her eyes occasionally darting toward the steering wheel as if fearing that purple-faced old man would reappear at any moment. I tried to talk to dispel the heaviness, telling her about childhood memories of Grandpa taking me on outings in this very car. How he laughed heartily when he first taught me to hold the wheel. But every time I mentioned him, Emily shrank back as if those memories were touching an unhealed wound inside her. Emily. "Are you okay?" I asked her countless times during the journey, my voice as gentle as I could manage, but unable to hide the rising anxiety in my chest. She nodded and forced a smile, but I knew she was doing it for my sake. "I am fine. It is just, I still get chills down my spine whenever I think about it." We stopped beside a small lake in the forest to rest. I set up the tent, built a fire, and tried to create the romantic evening we had planned. Roasting marshmallows lying under the stars, holding each other by the crackling flames. But every time the wind rustled the leaves, Emily flinched and curled up, and I could not stop thinking about what she had told me. Grandpa's face kept flashing in my mind, and the final message he wanted to convey through Emily. "Tell my grandson I was murdered," echoed in my head like a whisper from the grave. The first night passed in oppressive silence. We lay side by side but could not sleep deeply, only dozing in fits because of invisible nightmares. The next morning, as the sun peeked over the mountains, Emily sat up, hugged her knees, and looked at me with eyes red from lack of sleep. "Trevor, can we go home early? I cannot take it anymore. I am so scared." I nodded immediately. I did not blame her at all. I myself was being crushed by an unease so heavy it was hard to breathe. What had happened was no longer a fun ghost story to tell around the campfire. It had become something real, a secret lurking around the car I was driving. The two of us packed up in tense silence, not saying a word to each other. The trip ended 3 full days earlier than planned. We drove back without speaking, only the steady growl of the engine and the wind whistling through the window cracks. I dropped Emily off first at her small apartment in Portland, hugging her tightly in front of the door. "Get some rest, okay? I will call you later and I will thank you for trying." She kissed me goodbye. "You be careful too, Trevor. I have a feeling this is not over yet." Her words stabbed my heart like a knife. I drove away with my mind reeling, not heading straight home, but turning directly into the familiar maintenance garage on the outskirts of Fairview, the place the Dalton family had entrusted with every precious car for years. I could not let anything happen to this Bentley, no matter how minor. My father had warned me clearly. Even one scratch would be enough to unleash his fury. And after everything that had happened, I did not want any more trouble from him. The garage belonged to Frank Miller, tucked away on a quiet street. Frank was a master mechanic whom my grandfather had trusted absolutely. He had serviced this Bentley since it was brand new, and after Grandpa's death, Frank remained the only person my father allowed to touch the car. I parked in front of the garage and stepped out exhausted but forced a smile when I saw Frank wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. "Good Lord, Trevor! Long time no see!" he exclaimed, eyes widening in surprise when he spotted the gleaming black Bentley behind me. "You little rascal, you gave me a start. You are actually driving Mr. Walter's car. I thought it would stay locked away in your dad's garage forever." I gave an awkward smile and shook his hand firmly. Frank was over 72 now, hair snow-white, face etched with wrinkles, but his eyes still sharp and his grip as strong as ever. "I borrowed it from Dad for a few days, sir. My girlfriend and I were going on a trip, but it did not go smoothly. I want you to give it a full check. Tires, engine oil, everything. I do not want anything that could make Dad angry." Frank nodded and ran his hand over the hood as if greeting an old friend. "All right, kid. I will pull it inside." It has been ages since I last got my hands on her. He drove the car into the bay. I sat on an old wooden bench in the corner, sipping black coffee. The steady clink of metal tools echoed Frank muttering something to his young assistant, and I tried not to let my thoughts run wild, but I could not. The image of Emily trembling on the curb kept replaying along with the face of Grandpa she had described. I pulled out my phone and texted Emily that I was getting the car serviced and would call her tonight. But my hands shook as I typed. Everything went normally for nearly an hour. Frank checked the tires, changed the oil, cleaned the brake system. Everything remarkably stable for a classic car that had been dormant for years. He even praised how the Bentley still ran as smoothly as the day it left the factory thanks to my family's meticulous care. But then when Frank opened the small glove compartment on the left, a rarely touched space that usually held only odds and ends like paper maps or an old cigarette case, he suddenly froze and fell silent. I stood up and walked over, a bad feeling creeping in. "What is it, Mr. Frank?" He did not answer right away. He just reached deep inside and rummaged for a moment before pulling out a small black device covered in dust but intact. It looked like an old GPS unit from the early 2000s. Tiny screen, protruding buttons, a stubby antenna. Something practically extinct now. "That is odd," Frank muttered, wiping the dust off with his rag. "I do not remember Mr. Walter ever installing this, though it makes sense. He liked vintage stuff, probably used an old GPS to match the car. But why hide it so deep?" My heart pounded as I stared at the device. An eerie premonition surged through me like a cold wave down my spine. "Are you sure it is Grandpa's? Does it still work?" Frank gave a dry chuckle and turned it over in his hands. "Let me check. These things run on long-lasting batteries. There might still be old data inside." He took it to his workbench and plugged it into the garage's ancient computer via a dusty USB port, recounting old stories about my grandfather, how Mr. Walter would bring the car in for repairs and sit puffing cigars while chatting with him for hours. I stood beside him, burning with impatience, unable to tear my eyes from the screen as the software began reading the data. After some fiddling, Frank looked up at me with a mix of surprise and concern. "It works fine, Trevor. Memory is fully intact. All the previous trips are still logged. I can export the file for you if you want." I nodded instantly, my voice tight with nerves. "Yes, please. I want to see it." Frank asked no questions, just copied the data to a small USB drive and handed it to me. I paid the service bill, a hefty sum, but I did not care, and drove home with a heavy heart, feeling as if I had accidentally touched a crucial clue I should never have uncovered. The entire way back, I did not play music or roll down the windows. I just drove in silence, staring at the USB in the console as if it were staring back at me. Back in my small Fairview studio, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat at my computer. Night had fallen. Rain pattered softly against the window, the steady drumming making the atmosphere even heavier. I plugged in the USB and opened the GPS file. A long list of trips logged by date and time. Coordinates precise to the second. I scrolled straight to the oldest remaining data. The exact moment my father said Grandpa disappeared. 6 years ago, the day he went fishing alone and never returned. My heart pounded so hard it hurt as I examined the final recorded journey. The car left the mansion early in the morning, heading toward the coast as Dad had described. But then it stopped for over 3 hours at a completely unfamiliar location, deep in the Cascade Ridge forest, nowhere near the route to the beach. The coordinates were clear, the timing exact, no mistake possible. Only after that did the car continue to the beach, stopped there briefly, and then the data ended. I sat frozen before the screen, hands trembling so badly I had to grip the desk. It was impossible. Dad said Grandpa drove to the beach, parked, hopped in his boat to fish alone, and was lost to a massive wave. But this data showed the car had lingered for hours somewhere else entirely before reaching the coast. Who drove it after that, and why hide the GPS so thoroughly? A chill raced down my spine. Perhaps Grandpa Walter Dalton's disappearance at sea never happened the way my father claimed. And this car, the one my father did not want anyone to touch, had been guarding that secret for 6 long years. I shut down the computer and sat in the dark, listening to the rain while an icy dread filled me. Now I was certain. Grandpa was not just speaking through Emily. He was leading me to the truth. And that truth, I feared, would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. The next morning, I drove the Bentley back to the mansion with a heavier heart than ever, as if a massive rock were pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. A light drizzle fell, tiny droplets clinging to the windshield and being swept back and forth by the wipers in a monotonous rhythm that did nothing to dispel the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind. I had barely slept at all the night before, lying there staring at the pitch-black ceiling while the computer screen with those cold GPS coordinates flashed relentlessly every time I closed my eyes. The car had stopped in the forest for over 3 hours before reaching the sea. Who drove it after that, and why had my father hidden the GPS so meticulously, as if he feared someone would discover it? I parked neatly in front of the mansion, turned off the engine, and sat motionless in the driver's seat. For a long while, my hands resting lightly on the wheel, but not daring to grip it tightly for fear the cold leather would remind me of what Emily had described. This car was no longer merely a family heirloom. It had become a silent witness guarding a horrifying secret I had unwittingly uncovered. The mansion's front door opened before I could even step out and ring the bell. My father stood there in a luxurious black silk robe, his silver-white hair combed back neatly as always, but his eyes remained sharp, cold, and wary as ever. He glanced at me once, then his gaze immediately shifted to the car behind me, and I clearly saw him freeze for a brief moment. His shoulders tensed slightly as if he had been punched invisibly in the gut, his face paling for an instant. "You are back this early?" he asked, his voice striving for calm, but I could hear the tension lurking beneath that icy veneer. Was the car tampered with in any way? Any scratches? I shook my head slowly, trying to keep my voice steady so as not to betray the surging anxiety. "It is fine, Dad. Everything is intact just as before. I had it thoroughly checked." He nodded faintly, but his eyes stayed glued to the car's body, as if searching for some invisible scratch that could ignite his rage. I took a deep breath, knowing that if I did not ask now, I would never muster the courage again. The suspicion had built up too much. I could no longer stay silent. "Dad," I began, my voice trembling slightly but trying to hold firm. "I want to ask you about Grandpa Walter, about the day he disappeared all those years ago." "Why do you always dodge the subject whenever I bring it up, refusing to say anything?" The air around us suddenly turned heavy as lead, as if the whole world were holding its breath. My father whipped around to stare at me, and I clearly saw a flash of panic in his eyes just for a fleeting moment before he quickly rebuilt his familiar, cold, authoritative facade that he used to dominate everyone. But I had seen it, and it made my heart beat faster. "Your grandfather has been dead a long time," he growled, enunciating each word, his voice dropping into a threatening rumble. "A very long time. Stop digging up the past, Trevor. Let him rest in peace." But I think something does not add up. I tried to explain, my voice shaking from a mix of fear and determination. Emily sensed something strange from this car. She saw Grandpa appear. He said he was murdered. My father let out a dry, humorless laugh, devoid of any joy, only contempt and pent-up fury. "That delusional writer girl of yours?" He stepped closer, his voice lowering with disdain. "She is making up stories to extort money from our family, is she, not the filthy type who spews nonsense to get attention? How many times have I told you to stay away from people like that?" My heart constricted as if someone were squeezing it. "Do not talk about her like that." I shot back immediately, my voice rising in anger. "Emily is not that kind of person. She really saw Grandpa. And I found the GPS hidden in the glove compartment." The car stopped in the Cascade Ridge forest for over 3 hours before reaching the sea. That was not just an accident. Was it, Dad? He fell silent instantly, his face turning ashen in a split second. I thought he might collapse. Then he lunged forward, grabbing my collar so hard I nearly fell backward, his hot breath blasting into my face with rage. His eyes were bloodshot veins bulging in his neck, and his voice trembled with exploding fury. "What do you want, Trevor?" he roared, his tone both furious and laced with a fear he could not hide. "To destroy this family, to smear me, to smear the entire Dalton name. I forbid you to ever mention your grandfather's death again, and cut ties with that crazy writer girl. If I hear you bring this up one more time, I will make sure you have nothing left." I stood frozen, not from fear, though his grip on my collar was painfully tight, but because I saw clearly in his eyes that it was not pure anger. It was deep terror, the dread of a horrifying secret being exposed. I pried his hands off my collar, stepped back to regain my composure, then turned and walked away without another word, leaving him standing motionless in the vast hallway, his heavy breathing echoing. As I drove away from the mansion in my old Ford, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw my father still standing in the doorway, his face ghostly pale under the dim yellow light, looking more lonely and aged than ever. The days that followed were pure hell for me. I could not sleep at all, lying in bed with my mind spinning endlessly. Emily's trembling account of Grandpa's face, the cold GPS coordinates marking a stop in the forest, and my father's over-the-top reaction, the panicked look he could not conceal. I tossed and turned all night, cold sweat soaking me despite the chilly apartment as winter approached. And every brief doze ended with me jolting awake from nightmares. Finally, I could not take it anymore. I drove straight to Emily's apartment. She opened the door with eyes red from sleepless nights herself, and without a word, we threw ourselves into a long, tight embrace right on the threshold, as if letting go would mean losing each other forever. I told her everything. The hidden GPS, the Cascade Ridge forest, my father's terrified reaction when questioned. She listened without interrupting, gripping my hand tightly. And when I finished, she looked at me with eyes full of pity and deep concern. "You are not crazy, Trevor," she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. "I believe you completely, and I can help you." I looked up sharply, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. "How can you help?" Emily took a deep breath, as if gathering all her courage. "If you have something truly personal to your grandfather, something he touched often or carried with him before he died, I can follow the memories still lingering in it. I have tried it a few times with old objects. It is not always clear, but we can try." My heart raced as if it would burst from my chest. I immediately thought of the old leather strap watch Grandpa had given me on my 18th birthday. He had said, "This has been with me for 42 years. Now it is yours. Take care of it. It holds my soul." I still wore it every day, even though the crystal was scratched and it ran a few minutes slow. I unclasped the watch from my wrist, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, and handed it to Emily. "Be careful," I whispered. She nodded, sat on the sofa, and placed the watch in her palm. I sat close beside her, holding my breath. At first, everything was calm. Emily just closed her eyes and breathed steadily to focus. But then suddenly her body tensed, like a bowstring pulled to its limit. Her face went white, lips pressed tight. The exact reaction as before when she touched the Bentley steering wheel. I wanted to shake her awake, but did not dare, only gripping her hand tighter and whispering, "Emily, hang in there, love." Then a voice emerged, but it was no longer Emily's usual voice, hoarse, halting as if coming from far away. I left the house early in the morning, told no one, just said I was going fishing, but I knew they wanted to meet me in the forest. My heart nearly stopped. She continued. "They went mad over the new will. I had changed it, left everything to my grandson Trevor. They could not stand it. Then they strangled me from the back seat. I could not breathe anymore." Right after Emily let out a pained cry, dropped the watch to the floor, and collapsed into my arms, her whole body shaking as if on the verge of collapse. I held her tightly, tears streaming from my eyes, without my realizing my heart pounding wildly at the horrifying truth just revealed. Emily looked up at me, eyes brimming with tears, but her gaze more resolute than ever. "Trevor, Your grandfather was really murdered. And the person who did it is someone in your family. I hurriedly scribbled down every detail in a notebook, my hands trembling so much the writing was barely legible. I knew I was standing on the edge of a vast, terrifying secret about Grandpa's death, one that could destroy everything. And now there was no turning back. We did not wait another second. That very evening, after Emily had calmed down and finished the warm cup of water I had made for her, we sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment to plan. The air was still heavy, the burnt coffee smell from the pot lingering, but we both knew time was running out. If Grandpa had led us here through Emily through the watch, we had to act before everything was erased. I opened the map on my phone and entered the exact coordinates from the GPS data Frank had exported. A point deep in Cascade Ridge Forest, over 2 hours' drive from the city where paved roads vanished and only rough dirt tracks remained. "Are you sure, Trevor?" Emily asked, her voice still weak after the terrifying trance, but her eyes more resolute than ever. "If we find something, everything will change forever." I gripped her hand tightly, feeling the warmth from her palm flow into me like the only strength I had left. "I am sure Grandpa is waiting for us. We have to do this for him." We prepared all night. I drove to my apartment to grab the collapsible shovel I always took on wilderness shoots. Powerful flashlights, gloves, large plastic bags for evidence, and my professional camera to document everything clearly. Emily packed water snacks and a thick jacket. She said the forest was bone-chilling this season, especially at dusk. We did not sleep. We just sat together talking, trying to stay calm by holding each other tightly. But we both knew tomorrow would be the day our lives changed forever. Dawn broke under a gray sky, heavy with low clouds, as we set off in my old pickup truck. The highway was smooth at first, but the deeper we went into Cascade Ridge Forest, the worse the roads became. Asphalt gave way to rutted red dirt tracks full of potholes and jagged rocks barely wide enough for one vehicle. Towering trees lined both sides, their dense canopies blocking the sky and turning daylight into a dim twilight. The smell of damp earth-rotting leaves and fresh pine rushed in through the cracked windows, but the atmosphere was no longer poetic. It was ominous, threatening. Emily sat in the passenger seat, clutching the printed map, occasionally directing me left or right based on the phone's GPS. "Turn right at that bend. Slow down. It is slippery." Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to stay steady for my sake. I drove slowly, tires sinking into the mud, the engine growling in protest on steep inclines. Some sections were so narrow that branches scraped the truck's sides with a screech, and I had to lean out to avoid boulders scattered in the path. My heart pounded the whole way, not from the rough terrain, but because we were getting closer to the truth, a truth that would forever alter my world. It took over 3 hours to reach the closest point the truck could go. Ahead lay only a narrow footpath, choked with tangled roots and thick leaf litter. I parked on the roadside, killed the engine, and sat still for a moment, taking deep breaths to steady myself. Emily looked at me, eyes glistening but full of determination. "Let us go. He is waiting." We shouldered our backpacks, shovel flashlights, camera, and hiked deep into the forest. The trail grew harder. Our feet sank into the wet, decaying leaves, the chirping of insects mixing with the wind howling through the treetops. The biting cold seeped through our jackets, and I realized the forest was utterly isolated. No people, no engines, just our footsteps echoing in our labored breathing. Finally, after nearly an hour of walking, Emily stopped abruptly. She pointed ahead, whispering as if afraid to wake someone. "There, that is the spot." I followed her finger, and my heart stopped. Before us was a small clearing amid the dense pines dominated by a large moss-covered boulder that looked like a natural tombstone. Beside it was a slight mound of earth raised above the surrounding ground, unlike the flat, evenly settled soil elsewhere. Wild grass grew sparsely, but the mound was clearly newer, as if someone had hastily covered it years ago. Emily froze, eyes wide, staring at the mound. I see him," she whispered, voice shaking with emotion. "Mr. Walter is standing right there, his eyes so sad. He has been waiting for someone to find him." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. A chill ran down my spine despite my thick jacket. Instinct screamed. The truth was right beneath our feet. I could not wait any longer. I dropped the backpack, pulled out the shovel, and began digging. Each thrust into the earth felt like a blow to my own heart. The soil was wet, heavy, laced with small roots splattering onto my clothes. I dug slowly, carefully, sweat pouring down despite the cold. Emily stood beside me, flashlight beam, steady eyes locked on the mound as if afraid to miss anything. The shovel's rhythmic thud echoed in the deathly silent forest, and every layer of soil turned made my pulse race faster. After about half an hour, though it felt like a century, the blade struck something soft, not rock or root. I knelt, brushed away the dirt with my hands, and uncovered a thick black plastic sheet rotted by time, but still mostly intact. My hands shook as I pulled it back, and then I froze. A human skeleton lay curled in the shallow pit, still clad in clothes I remembered vividly. The dark blue shirt Grandpa wore, while gardening beige khaki pants and the polished brown leather shoes he proudly boasted were from Italy. I collapsed to the ground, the shovel clattering beside me, and burst into sobs like a child. Tears streamed uncontrollably, my chest aching with pain, shock, and surging rage. The man I respected most, who had shielded me from my father throughout my childhood, who taught me kindness and photography. He had been buried silently in this forest for 6 years, like discarded trash. I hugged my knees, sobbing until I could barely breathe, my cries echoing through the woods and startling birds into flight. Emily knelt beside me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders, tears rolling down her cheeks. We sat there for a long time in the cold forest beside Grandpa's makeshift grave. When I regained some composure, I wiped my eyes and began piecing everything together. The GPS data ended here. Grandpa's words through Emily about being strangled from the back seat. The new will. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Walter's death was no accident. This was premeditated murder, and my father. My father might be part of this horrific crime. I voiced it to Emily, my voice raw from crying. Dad, he is involved. He knows." Emily flinched, her face paling in the flashlight's glow. I saw it too. During the trance with the watch, I vaguely saw 2 men beside the car, one tall, silver hair combed back very much like your father's features. Her words were the final knife to my heart. I reached for my phone to call the police, already dialing 911, but Emily gripped my hand tightly. "Do not. Your father is too powerful. He has money connections. He could erase everything before the police arrive. We need stronger evidence, more time." I looked at her, heart bleeding but mind clearing. She was right. Reporting now would alert my father. Everything would vanish. The remains moved, the forest bulldozed, and we would have nothing. With a bleeding heart but sharper focus than ever, I photographed everything with my professional camera. Every angle of the pit, the skeleton, the clothes, even the GPS coordinates and surrounding traces. I collected soil samples, fabric scraps from Grandpa's clothes, and sealed them in plastic bags. We refilled the hole, camouflaged the mound so no one would notice, and quietly left the forest as night fell. The entire drive back I said nothing, just holding Emily's hand tightly. We would investigate, silently gather more evidence without alerting anyone in the family, because now I was not just seeking justice for Grandpa. I also had to protect myself and Emily from those willing to kill to keep the secret. We arrived back in the city when it was pitch black. The dim yellow streetlights shining down on the rain-slicked roads created hazy pools of light like unhealed wounds. I dropped Emily off at her apartment first, hugging her tightly outside the door, feeling her heartbeat racing no less than mine. Get some rest, I whispered, my voice raw from exhaustion and the lingering emotions from the forest. I will call you as soon as there is anything new. She nodded, eyes red-rimmed but forcing a faint smile. You be careful too, Trevor. Do not do anything alone. I drove to my apartment, but I could not sleep that night. The image of Grandpa's skeleton haunted me relentlessly. The next morning, I decided to act. I could not just sit and wait anymore. I searched online for a reputable private investigator in Portland, someone who had worked for wealthy families and knew how to keep secrets. I met him in a secluded little cafe wearing a hoodie pulled low over my head so no one would recognize me. His name was Victor Hayes, about 50 years old with a scarred face and eyes sharp as razors. I need you to tail my father, I said bluntly, voice low so no one could overhear. Richard Dalton. Every activity, every meeting, everywhere he goes, especially anything related to 6 years ago, the day my grandfather disappeared. Victor raised an eyebrow but did not ask many questions. He was used to wealthy family cases riddled with secrets. It will not be cheap, kid. I will pay double, I replied, sliding an envelope of cash across the table. But it has to be completely discreet. He nodded. And that was the start. A few days later, Victor called me at midnight. I picked up immediately, heart pounding. I have got what you need. His voice came low through the phone. On the exact day Mr. Walter went to sea 6 years ago, Richard Dalton left the mansion early in the morning around 5:15, and he headed in the same direction as the old man's Bentley. A chill ran down my spine. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. You are sure positive? I cross-checked traffic logs and some old archived cameras. He returned home late that night, face ashen, according to an old maid I tracked down. I hung up and sat frozen in the dark. My father had been there. He had followed Grandpa into the forest. Every piece was falling into place in a terrifying way. But I kept up appearances. I still went for the usual weekend family dinner. Even though every glance at my father made Grandpa's purple face flash before my eyes, that meal unfolded in the familiar heavy atmosphere. Dad at the head of the table, slicing his steak with surgical precision, Mom beside him, trying to keep the conversation light with questions about the weather and health. When Dad retired early to his room because he was tired, I saw my chance. I turned to Mom, voice soft but firm. Mom. Before Grandpa disappeared, was there anything unusual? Anything you have never told me? Mom froze, knife and fork suspended in midair. She looked at me for a long moment, her warm brown eyes suddenly filled with sadness. Why are you suddenly asking about old things? Trevor, I just miss him, Mom. I want to know more about him. She sighed, set down her utensils, and gazed out the window where rain was falling lightly again. About a week before, Grandpa went fishing and never came back. There was a huge argument between Grandpa Uncle Brandon Dalton and your father. My heart pounded. What was the argument about, Mom? She hesitated, voice trembling. I only overheard bits because I was outside the door. About inheritance, about Grandpa planning to change some important documents. Uncle Brandon and your father were yelling loudly, saying Grandpa was destroying the family. Grandpa was adamant, saying it had to be done to protect the family's future. The tension was so thick I did not dare go in. I just slipped away quietly. Then Grandpa disappeared. Hearing Uncle Brandon's name, I went rigid. My uncle, Brandon Dalton. Dad's younger brother. The one who always smiled but had cold eyes, who ran the Dalton retail branch in California and rarely visited. A horrifying suspicion gripped me. This crime was not the work of just one person, not just my father. Uncle, too. I did not wait any longer. The next morning, despite my reeling mind and the dark circles under my eyes from sleeplessness, I drove straight to the office of attorney Jonathan Blake, the lawyer who had handled my grandfather's will. The law office was in a towering glass skyscraper, luxurious in the way that catered to the elite. But today it filled me with disgust. I stepped into the cold marble hallway, pressed the elevator button for the 24th floor, feeling as if I were walking into the enemy's lair. Mr. Blake's personal secretary, a prim, middle-aged woman, looked at me in surprise when I demanded an immediate meeting without an appointment. "Attorney Blake is extremely busy," she said, polite but icy. "You can leave a message." "No," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. "Tell him it is Trevor Dalton, grandson of Walter. He will see me." She hesitated, then picked up the internal phone. Seconds later, the heavy walnut door swung open, and Jonathan Blake stood there, 70 years old. Snow-white hair, gold-rimmed glasses, impeccably tailored gray suit. But I noticed the change immediately. His eyes darted away, his shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. He spoke, striving for calm. "Trevor, come into my office." The office was expansive, with a view of Harbor Bay sparkling under Portland's rare sunshine. But I did not care. I sat in the leather chair opposite his desk, staring straight into his eyes. "I want to ask about Grandpa's will," I cut to the chase. "No beating around the bush. The real one." Mr. Blake went pale instantly. He set down his pen, forcing an awkward smile. "Trevor, everything about Mr. Walter's will has been clear for years. The final will was publicly disclosed. Inheritance rights belong to your father and Uncle Brandon. Everything is transparent, fully legal. You do not need to worry about it." "Transparent?" I repeated, my voice cold as ice. "Mr. Blake, I know everything. I know Grandpa was murdered. I know my father and uncle are behind it all. And I know you are the only one still alive who knows the full truth. If you do not talk, I will sue you as an accomplice for concealing a murder." The air in the room suddenly froze solid. Mr. Blake's face turned ashen, his trembling hand pulling his glasses down his nose, his aged eyes wide with terror. He stared at me for a long time, as if weighing whether I was bluffing. Then he let out a long, defeated sigh, his shoulders slumping as if releasing a horrific burden he had carried for 6 years. How do you know?" His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "That does not matter, Mr. Blake," I replied. "I just need you to tell the truth. All of it." Mr. Blake stood, walked to the window, and gazed at the glittering Harbor Bay without really seeing it. He was silent for a long while before he began, voice shaking as if confessing before God. "A few months before the disappearance, Mr. Walter came to see me. He wanted to draft a new will. Completely new. He said Richard and Brandon had changed. Corrupted by money, obsessed with greed and power. He wanted to leave everything, company shares, real estate, investment funds, all of it, and control of Dalton Retail Group to you, Trevor. Because you were the only one in the family who still had a kind heart, who truly valued what he taught." My heart pounded. I was the sole heir. The entire billion-dollar empire that my father and uncle now held was rightfully mine. Richard and Brandon found out. Mr. Blake continued, voice trembling more. They confronted Mr. Walter, screaming, threatening, pressuring him to cancel the new will, but he refused. He said he would make it public if they kept pushing. Then he disappeared. Just weeks later, he turned to me, eyes red. Afterward, Richard and Brandon came to me. They threatened me, Trevor. My family, my career. They presented a forged will prepared long before, just waiting for the day, and forced me to declare it the final one. In exchange, they gave me a huge sum, enormous enough to keep me silent forever. I shot to my feet, the chair toppling behind me. "You were bought off. You let my grandfather be murdered and said nothing." I was terrified. Mr. Blake trembled, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I am just an old lawyer, Trevor. I do not have the Dalton power. If I spoke, I would die like him." I left the office in a daze of rage and shock. My mind spun, my feet moving without knowing where. I was the legitimate heir. My father and uncle had killed Grandpa to steal everything. A few days later, on a stormy evening, Victor called urgently. "I am sending you a file," Victor's voice tense. "Audio from a private cafe in Bellevue. Richard and Brandon met this morning. Listen." I opened the file on my laptop headphones clamped on heart racing. My father's voice came first low but laced with menace. "Trevor is digging too deep. He's been asking around, even rummaging through the old man's study." Uncle Brandon's sneer followed. "How much does he know, bro?" "Enough to be dangerous," Dad replied. "We have to erase every trace of the old man before he takes this outside. The remains, the GPS, the fake will everything." Silence for a moment. Then Brandon's voice cold as a blade. "If he keeps digging, we will have to handle him the same way we did the old man. No other choice." I froze, the headphones slipping from my ears. My father and uncle were ready to kill me, their own son, their own nephew, to cover their tracks. Pain, fury, and fear fused inside me into something monstrous. But in that moment I knew there was no turning back. I would face them, and I would win. The following days felt like living in a horror movie I could not turn off. My phone buzzed incessantly with anonymous messages from unknown numbers. "Shut up if you do not want to vanish like the old man. You are playing with fire, you idiot." One day when I opened the mailbox outside my apartment, I found a plain white envelope with no name. Inside was a photo of me taken from afar while walking with Emily, accompanied by a note in glaring red handwriting. "She will be next." I trembled so violently I had to collapse onto the floor, crumpling the envelope in my fist. Emily was getting strange calls at midnight too. Cold, distorted voices. "Stay out of Dalton family business. Back off or you will have an accident." She called me in tears, her voice breaking with fear, and for the first time I heard her sob like a child. We lived in constant vigilance, triple-checking door locks before bed, drawing all the curtains, turning off lights early, never going out alone after 8 o'clock in the evening. I installed extra security cameras around the apartment, bought pocket pepper spray, and even considered getting a gun, but thought better of it, knowing that if my father and uncle wanted, they could hire professionals to make it look like an accident. Every odd noise at night jolted me awake, heart-pounding, hand clutching the paring knife under my pillow. I realized the situation had spiraled completely out of control. I could not keep holding this ticking bomb alone. I needed a professional, someone I trusted absolutely. Martin Crane, my college friend, a renowned criminal attorney in Portland. I called him at 2 o'clock in the morning, voice shaking, and told him everything. No holding back. The car, Emily's visions, the GPS, the remains in the forest, the recording of my father and uncle plotting to handle Emily and me to silence us. Martin's only response was calm. "Send it all to me right now." I did. Photos of the scene, GPS files, scanned copies of the fake will that Jonathan Blake had secretly photographed for me. I walked in and pressed play. Richard's voice burst from the speaker, unmistakable and venomous. "Trevor is digging too deep. He has been asking around, even rummaging through the old man's study." Then Brandon's voice followed. "How much does he know, bro?" "Enough to be dangerous. We have to erase every trace of the old man before he takes this outside. The remains, the GPS, the fake will, everything." I watched their faces drain of color, their confidence cracking like shattered glass. The audio recording Emily's trance statements recorded again even the threatening messages. Martin had worked like a machine. In just 3 days, he compiled everything into a thick, airtight dossier. On the 4th day, he filed it with the United States Attorney's Office, requesting a special investigation into murder and evidence tampering. "It is done," Martin called from his office. "Now it is your call. Do you want to confront them face to face before the police arrive?" I knew I did. I needed to look them in the eye one last time, to hear them admit it, even if only through their gaze. I chose sunset to go to the mansion. The blood-red sunlight stained the lake behind the house. Cold wind whipped through the tall pines. I parked at the gate, stepped out, carrying nothing but a small USB in my jacket pocket, the final backup of all the evidence. I rang the bell. The maid opened the gate with a panicked expression as if she had been warned. The living room was lit, but the air was heavy as lead. My father sat in the large armchair. Uncle Brandon stood behind him, arms crossed. Mom was absent. They must have sent her upstairs. Both stared as I entered without a word, but I could tell they knew. They sensed what was coming. I stood in the center of the room, looking straight into my father's eyes. "I know your whole plot," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "About Grandpa, his death, the real will, what you both did that day in the forest." Dad sprang from his chair like a coiled spring face, flushed crimson, slamming his fist on the walnut table with a deafening crack. "You bastard!" he roared, spittle flying. "You dare slander your own father, you useless freeloader wandering photographer. Dare accuse me of killing my own father. What do you want? Money, fame. I will make sure you die in pieces." Uncle Brandon stood behind arms, still crossed eyes sharp as knives. "Some things are better left buried forever, Trevor," he said coldly. "If you want to stay in one piece." I did not argue, did not react. I simply pulled a stack of documents from my jacket. Photos of the remains, GPS data scanned real will bank transfer receipts from Richard and Brandon to Jonathan Blake, and laid them on the table. Then the USB and more forest crime scene photos. Finally, my phone. Richard paled in an instant, but quickly regained his authoritative sneer. "Fabrications. All of it. You hired someone to fake this, write cheap tricks from those trying to tear the Dalton family apart." Brandon ground his teeth trying to stay cool, but I saw his fists clench until veins bulged in his neck. He had not expected me to have so much. I opened my phone, turned on speaker, and hit play on the final recording. Uncle Brandon's voice rang out crystal clear. "If he keeps digging, we will have to handle him the same way we did the old man." A heartbroken sob erupted from the staircase. Mom stood there, hand over her chest, legs trembling as if about to collapse. She looked at Dad, then Uncle Brandon, then me. Her eyes shattered as if her entire world had crumbled. Richard lunged like a wild animal, snatching for the phone. But I stepped back, eyes cold as steel. "Pointless, Dad," I said. "Everything is backed up, already submitted to the prosecutor. Police are on their way." Brandon swore viciously, punching the wall so hard blood streamed from his knuckles, face purple with panic. For the first time in my life, I saw that arrogant uncle truly shake. Shoulders quivering, eyes glistening as if on the verge of tears. Dad stood frozen, face drained of color, lips moving soundlessly. He looked at me for the first time ever, like a real enemy. I turned and walked out, leaving behind Dad's roars, Mom's choked sobs, Uncle Brandon's curses, and a family shattered beyond repair. As I stepped out of the mansion, the sunset had vanished. The sky was pitch black, lit only by distant headlights. The police convoy racing toward us. I knew from that moment the truth had no way back. I stepped out of the mansion as the sky had turned pitch black, the biting cold wind slicing through the row of pines. Police headlights appeared in the distance, red and blue flashing relentlessly, sirens wailing through the night. I stood motionless on the roadside, hands in my jacket pockets, watching the vehicles barrel toward me like a storm I had summoned myself. The iron gate flung open, police cars surged into the courtyard, the rhythmic thud of tactical boots echoing on the marble pavement. I did not look back. I only heard Mom's piercing scream as the door was forced open. Dad's growl cut short when handcuffs clicked and Uncle Brandon's final curse before his head was shoved into the back seat. I drove home in absolute silence. No radio, no calls, just the rain pounding the windshield and my heart thundering in my chest. The next day, the city exploded. Martin called at 6 o'clock in the morning. They arrested Richard and Brandon overnight. Our file was airtight. The prosecutor opened a special case. Forensics is already in Cascade Ridge Forest. I turned on the TV. Every channel led with it. 2 Dalton Retail Group tycoons emergency arrested for suspected murder 6 years ago. Remains believed to be billionaire Walter Dalton discovered. Biggest shock in Portland finance history. The investigation moved with terrifying speed. They cordoned off the forest, erected white tents, swept every centimeter with cadaver dogs and metal detectors. Bone samples, a rusted metal box, rotted plastic sheeting scraps of dark blue shirt fabric, everything carefully collected, sealed, sent to the federal forensics lab. Within 48 hours, preliminary results. Male 70 to 80 years old died from hyoid bone fracture caused by strangulation from behind. Time of death matching Grandpa's disappearance. Exactly. No seawater traces, no suicide indicators. Premeditated murder. Richard and Brandon were held separately. Richard stayed silent for the first 72 hours, repeating only, "I want my lawyer." Brandon raged, slamming tables, demanding privileges for contributions to Oregon's economy. But when Jonathan Blake, under prosecutor pressure and a final surge of conscience, entered as a witness, everything collapsed. Blake spilled it all. The real will stored in a Swiss bank vault which he had photographed before being forced to destroy the original. An $8 million offshore transfer from Richard to silence him, and an old recording he had secretly kept. The final meeting with the Dalton brothers, right after Grandpa vanished. Brandon broke after 14 straight hours of questioning. He confessed everything. The plan luring Grandpa to the forest for a private will talk. Richard strangling him from the back seat when he refused to revert to the old will. Digging the grave together, wrapping the body in plastic, burying it, then driving to the coast to stage the scene. Richard sat beside him, face ghost, white, silent, staring at the wall, as if into hell. The trial opened just 3 months later, record speed for a case this size. The city followed every day. Media camped outside the courthouse. Helicopters circled overhead. The Dalton murder trended globally #1 for 2 weeks. I sat in the plaintiff's row beside Martin and Emily, watching Dad and Uncle in orange jumpsuits handcuffed let in. Richard clung to final dignity, silver hair, groomed back straight, but he had aged a decade in months. Brandon was wrecked, gaunt, dark circles, constantly wiping tears. Evidence was overwhelming, airtight. No lawyer could save them. Sentencing day, the courtroom packed. The judge read steadily, voice cold enough to silence the room. Richard Dalton. Life imprisonment, no parole. Brandon Dalton, 35 years, no bail. Jonathan Blake, 5 years, suspended permanent disbarment. He paused, looked straight at me, then read the last line. Per the restored legal will from the Swiss bank, all assets and control of Dalton Retail Group are awarded to the sole heir, Trevor Dalton. I sat motionless in the front row, hearing the verdict without feeling victory, only emptiness. Dad looked up at me one final time before being led away, eyes no longer angry, just hollow hatred. Brandon sobbed like a child. The press swarmed like wolves. Dalton Empire collapses after trial of the century. Brothers murder father for billions. From power icons to lifers overnight. Dalton retail stock plunged 72% in a week. Employees panicked. Customers boycotted. Partners severed ties. I did not save the company. I let it die as it deserved. I left the courthouse through a storm of flashes and reporters shouting my name. How did it feel to be Portland's youngest billionaire? Would I forgive my father? Any regrets? I answered nothing. I pushed through, got in my car, and drove straight to the small lakeside house I had just bought for Mom. I had won justice for Grandpa. but the price was a family utterly shattered beyond any salvation. After the trial, I never set foot in the Dalton Retail Group headquarters, not even once. I signed power of attorney to an international auction house and sold everything shares real estate, the classic car collection, except the 1954 Bentley. I kept it not to drive, but as a reminder. The money poured into my accounts in dizzying figures, but it only left me cold. I established the Walter Dalton Foundation, funneling 20% of the assets into it to support arts education for underprivileged children. Exactly what Grandpa had dreamed of, but never dared pursue for fear of ridicule from my father and uncle. The rest I split in half. One portion for Mom, the other to live on. I sold the Bellevue Hilltop Mansion and moved Mom into a modest 2-story farmhouse on Bainbridge Island, a ferry ride from Portland with a vegetable garden, a small pond, and lush rows of evergreens. The first time Mom entered the new house, she stood in the empty living room, gazed out the window at the shimmering water, and cried. Not from loss, but because for the first time in decades, she could breathe without checking if her husband was angry. "Trevor, thank you," she whispered, hugging me tightly. I felt how much frailer her shoulders had become. I returned to photography as if returning to myself. Long trips were no longer escapes, but healing. I drove my old truck loaded with film cameras, camped in the woods, captured sunrises on Mount Rainier, forgotten fishing villages along the Oregon coast, children playing in eastern Washington wheat fields. My first post-trial exhibition was titled, "What Remains?" All black and white prints, no captions, just light and shadow. Crowds came not out of curiosity about the Dalton boy, but because they saw real pain in every frame. I sold out on opening night. The proceeds went straight to the foundation. Emily stayed by my side through those months. She never left when nightmares jolted me awake, screaming Grandpa's name drenched in cold sweat. She was the only one brave enough to remind me I was not at fault, that I had done the right thing. Our love was no longer romantic dates. It had deepened into something profound, resilient, like 2 ancient trees growing side by side to weather storms. We married on a spring afternoon at a small beach near home. No $10,000 gown, no French menu, no A-list guests, just Mom Martin Crane and his wife, a few of Emily's college friends, and Hank Mitchell, the old mechanic who teared up seeing I had kept the Bentley. I wore a white shirt, Emily a cream linen dress to her ankles, hair loose and natural. We exchanged rings at sunset waves crashing as our wedding march. I looked into her eyes and vowed without notes. I will spend the rest of my life protecting you and what we build. Not with money, but with this heart. A year later, Rhodes Dalton was born in a small island hospital, 7.5 pounds, crying like a kitten. I cut the cord hands, shaking so much the doctor laughed. When the nurse placed him in my arms, I looked into his clear blue eyes and wept. For the first time, the name Dalton carried no scent of blood, just a newborn's hope and light. I devoted most of my time to Mom and our little family. Mornings I brewed coffee for her, sat on the porch watching mist lift off the lake. Afternoons, I pushed Rhodes's stroller on walks, Emily beside me, hand in hand. The simple life I dreamed of in my youth, no luxury cars, no mansions, no flashes, now fit perfectly in my palms. One autumn afternoon, when maple leaves blazed red along the path to historic Lakeview Cemetery, I brought the family to visit Grandpa's grave. His remains had been reinterred with dignity after the trial. A simple granite stone engraved only with Walter Dalton and the line I chose. He taught his grandson that kindness is the greatest inheritance. I held Rhodes in my arms. Emily guided Mom beside us. Saria wore a cream sweater, more silver in her hair now. But her eyes held a rare peace, as if finally freed from years of fear and guilt. I stood before the stone, lightly touching the cold surface, feeling as if I were touching Grandpa's hand from long ago. The painful journey flooded back. The Bentley Emily's touched the forest, the remains, the trial handcuffs, Mom's crying, all like a long film where I was the reluctant lead. "Thank you," I whispered, voice choking. "Thank you for teaching me to hold on to kindness. That true strength comes from facing the truth." Emily squeezed my hand. Rhodes slept soundly in my arms. Mom stood silently beside us, tears rolling but smiling. Before the grave, I left a final silent message. I choose to live with integrity, contentment, and love. That is the greatest legacy you left me. I looked at my little family under the gentle autumn sun. Mom, my wife, my son, and my heart suddenly felt light, as if a years-long burden had lifted. After all the tragedy, all the loss, I understood. Not fame or fortune, but humanity, love, and kindness were what let me move forward steadily. Grandpa was right.